These shacks used to be homes for black families. But now the white government has turned them into barracks for male workers only. The shacks are divided into compartments. There are 18 men in each compartment. Sunday is the only day off for these workers, but they cannot spend it with their families because their wives and children have been evicted and resettled in special rural areas, the Bantustans. The government keeps the men here to work in the factories and docks of Cape Town. They live in these labor camps and can only return to the Bantustans for 1 month in every year. For the other 11 months, their wives in the Bantustans can do nothing except wait for news and money from them. The nearest Bantustans are over 300 miles away, and a government act prevents the women and children from joining their husbands in the townships. The government's justification for their policy of splitting up black families was given by Mr. Froneman while he was Deputy Minister of Justice.
Black workers must not be burdened with superfluous appendages like women and children.
Over 50% of black workers and their families are now forced to live apart. And here in Cape Town, the figure has reached 85%. In this film, we show what it's like for the black people of South Africa to be on the receiving end of the white government's apartheid policies. South Africa is a rich, industrialized country with the capability of producing her own nuclear bombs. In this country of 22 million people, the lives of the 15 million blacks, 2 million coloreds, and 600,000 Indians are totally controlled by the white minority of under 4 million. The whites alone have the vote, and the whites alone control the government and the law, industry and the armed forces. From this solid base of supremacy, white South Africans enjoy the highest standard of living in the world. These signs are the face of apartheid familiar to the outside world. Often they seem to be carried to incredible lengths. Areas for Chinese only, while Japanese businessmen, for sound economic reasons, are classified as honorary whites. Whites-only beaches, where blacks spend the day shoveling back the sand washed away by the sea. But such scenes are only the absurd part of a system which is designed to allow the whites to maintain exclusive power and control over the blacks. As the Prime Minister, Mr. Vorster, has said,
"We need them to work for us, but the fact that they work for us can never entitle them to claim political rights, not now, nor in the future, under no circumstances."
Mr. Vorster's party, the Nationalists, have been in power for the last 25 years. They've been able to put into effect their doctrine of apartheid because of their military strength. Prime Minister Vorster was imprisoned during the Second World War for his pro-Nazi sympathies. At that time, he said,
"We stand for Christian nationalism. You can call the anti-democratic principle dictatorship if you wish. In Italy it is called fascism, in Germany National Socialism, and in South Africa Christian nationalism."
Under apartheid, 87% of the country is reserved for the whites and called South Africa. The remaining 13%, made up of about 100 pieces of land, has been renamed the Bantustans, the so-called homelands for the blacks. All the principal towns, mineral resources and industry are in the white area, and so is the most productive farming land. At present, 8 million blacks live in the white area, and 7 million are compelled by law to live in the Bantustans. The government's present plans include the forced removal from the white area to the already overcrowded Bantustans of up to another 4 million blacks, those labelled as superfluous appendages. This woman and her family live in the Transkei Bantustan. Like all the Bantustans, the Transkei is desperately poor and underdeveloped. They are, as one black leader said, cesspools of poverty, ignorance and disease. The pot-bellies and the apathy of these children are the all too familiar signs of malnutrition. For a family to survive, the men have to go away to the cities to work for the whites. It's often impossible for the women left behind to grow enough food because drought and soil erosion have destroyed the land. An official report estimated that the Bantustans could provide a subsistence living for only 2.5 million people. Today, already 7 million people are forced to live in them. As more people are herded into the Bantustans, the standard of living declines further. The income of each person here is now only £13 a year, among the lowest in the world. And yet, only 100 years ago, before the white conquest, the forefathers of these people were famous for their large herds of cattle. Today, the children are in tatters, and the women grow old in their 20s. The white government claims that under apartheid, the blacks can develop separately in the Bantustans. But the conditions of life here make a mockery of any of the government's claims of separate development. For even the government can no longer pretend that there's any land for the people they are moving to the Bantustans from the townships. For most of these families are put in specially built camps like this one. This is called Ozizweni and is in a KwaZulu Bantustan. Families who have lived all their lives in towns are given a one-room hut like this for their new home. There's nothing for the families in these camps. No land and no work. The people try and survive on the meager earnings from their absent husbands, brothers and sons who are away working in the cities. The government's justification for these mass removals was given by Mr. Botha, the Minister for Bantu Administration and Development.
The Bantu people like being moved. The Bantu people like the places where they are being resettled.
Already in the last 10 years, 1.5 million people have been moved, and the government plans to uproot a further 4 million blacks in the largest forced movement of people in peacetime. The government provides practically no services or facilities for those already forced to live in the Bantustans, let alone for those who are being resettled. These women and children are walking to a clinic in the Transkei Bantustan. They walk in from villages up to 20 miles away, often setting off before dawn. Each week, over 400 people attend the clinic, held here by the staff from a mission hospital. Most of them are suffering from malnutrition. Here, 1 in every 5 people has tuberculosis, and the major malnutrition disease among children, kwashiorkor, has increased by 300% over the last 4 years. The nurses and the doctor from Holland do what they can, but their resources are inadequate for the basic needs of the people. In South Africa, there is 1 doctor for every 400 whites and 1 doctor for every 44,000 blacks. For the 40,000 cases of malnutrition treated by doctors every year, there are over 1.5 million which are never seen. Of those who are seen, the lucky few receive treatment in one of the overcrowded black hospitals. For many, their first trip to hospital means their first proper meal. With this food, most of these children will recover, but 6 months after their release from hospital, many of them will be back, again suffering from malnutrition. There's nothing their mothers can do. They're too poor to feed them properly. 2 doctors who collected figures in a typical Bantustan discovered that 50% of the children died before the age of 5. The malnutrition diseases leave children retarded both mentally and physically for the rest of their lives. These children are suffering not because their country is poor, but because 87% of the land is reserved for the whites. This cattle auction is taking place on the edge of white South Africa, near the Transkei. The forefathers of these farmers conquered the Africans in the 19th century, took their land, and destroyed or stole their cattle.
Front, 168 there.
Today, blacks are only allowed back onto their original lands to work for the whites, and their children die in the Bantustans for lack of milk.
here. Sorry, Sam, it's not sold, Sam. 81, 71, 71, 71, 71,
The wealth of the white farmers is built on the availability of cheap black labor. These men are cutting sugarcane near Durban. They start at 4 in the morning. They work 6 days a week. Their pay is under 5p an hour, £2.20 a week. If you're born black, you start working young. This boy is 12. Foreign companies own a major share of every industry in South Africa. Agriculture is no exception. This estate is owned by the British firm Tate & Lyle. Another British company, the Slater Walker Group, also has substantial interests in the sugar industry. Furthermore, the United States subsidizes the white sugar farmers by guaranteeing to buy a fixed quota of their annual crop. This is the typical home of a sugar farmer. And these are the quarters of his laborers. 8 men share this room. White South Africa considers these conditions normal for her black workers. Their diet consists of porridge without milk or sugar and dried pumpkin leaves. The discovery of gold transformed South Africa from an agricultural country into an advanced industrialized state. And it's the gold mines that have set the pattern for the inequality between white and black in industry. For the 400,000 black miners have never seen the wealth that's been created by the gold they mine. They have to work up to 3 miles underground in intense heat and humidity. The work is extremely dangerous, especially for the black miners. 18,000 of them have died in the gold mines in the last 30 years, an average of 3 deaths per shift. By law, miners aren't allowed to work more than 48 hours a week. But the black miners spend 60 hours every week underground. Their reward is 7p an hour, £4 a week. The white miners earn 16 times as much. But an even greater proportion of the wealth goes to the mining companies. For 1972, their total black wage bill was £50 million. Their profits were £280 million. The mining companies keep the blacks in compounds around the mines at a cost of £8 a year each. Here, the miners are queuing for their daily food. It costs the companies 9p a day per miner. Meanwhile, white South Africa gets richer and richer. She has more cars, telephones, fridges, cameras than any nation in Europe. In fact, she has more of every household goods except vacuum cleaners, because of the availability of cheap servants. Under the Group Areas Act, blacks can't live in the same areas as whites. The whites live in the cities and the surrounding suburbs. They force their black workers to live in separate townships up to 30 miles outside the cities. The black township for Johannesburg is Soweto. It's the largest conurbation in South Africa, with a population of nearly 1 million. It's illegal for a black to own his own home here. Every building is owned by the white authorities. The government calls the blacks in the towns temporary sojourners and only allows them to remain here as long as they're working. The growing number of unemployed and the remaining families in the towns face removal to the Bantustans. Mr. Botha has said,
"No stone is to be left unturned to achieve the resettlement in the homelands of non-productive Bantu."
The Group Areas Act is now being enforced against the coloured and Indian populations. They're being evicted from their homes so that the cities become all white. There are 2 million coloureds, part black, part white, and from the earliest days, many of them have lived in Cape Town, particularly in this area called District 6. $45,000 coloureds are being thrown out of District 6 to make way for 15,000 whites. Some of their old homes will be converted. The rest bulldozed to the ground to make way for luxury flats, shopping centres and maisonettes for white occupation only. The whites already occupy the old coloured homes in this part of Cape Town, Newlands. A bit of paint here and some conversion and restoration there have turned Newlands into a white middle-class paradise. For the Coloureds, the Cape Flats, a barren piece of wilderness of sand and high winds, 20 miles outside Cape Town. It's been set aside for coloured occupation. Many of the coloured families thrown out of Cape Town have joined the 40,000 coloured families already without housing in the area. For them, the desolation of a shanty town. Every morning from their shanty towns and townships, the blacks move off on their daily journey to work in the factories and kitchens of white South Africa. For South Africa, these blacks pouring into Johannesburg are well off, and yet 4 out of every 5 of them are underfed. All menial jobs are performed by blacks. These men are collecting garbage in the back alleys of the white suburbs. They begin chasing the trash lorry at 6 every morning. The white driver never stops. Their pay is £5.50 a week, which is below the poverty datum line. The poverty datum line represents the lowest possible cost of maintaining a family and health on a day-to-day basis. Even in Johannesburg, 7 black families in every 10 live below the line. There is a rigid colour bar in all industries. No black is allowed to hold a position higher than a white. But the system of job reservation goes further and reserves all so-called skilled work for whites. For example, these white crane drivers can never be replaced by blacks. The whites call it their civilized labor policy. Dr. Verwoerd, the last Prime Minister, was very explicit about the position of black workers.
There is no place for him in the European community above the level of certain forms of labor.
The rigid colour bar is the basis for the inequality in the wages paid to black and white. The average income for a white family of 5 is £60 a week. For a black family of 5, it's £4.50 a week. And the gap has widened over the last 10 years. Under the master and servant laws, a black in many industries can go to jail for being absent from work for trying to change his job before his contract expires, or for refusing to obey a command. Furthermore, black trade unions aren't recognized, and nearly all strikes are illegal. In fact, black workers have no protection under the law. As Dr. Kernhoff said while Minister for Bantu Affairs,
African males from the homelands have no rights whatsoever in South Africa. They are only in South Africa to sell their labor.
The cheap labor system depends upon the government control of the movement of the blacks. This is exercised through the pass laws. All blacks over the age of 16 must carry a passbook stating the one area where he or she is permitted to live and the type of work he or she is permitted to do. Failure to produce your passbook on demand, lack of necessary permits or incorrect entries mean immediate arrest. Computers supplied to the government by the British firm ICL are to make the system more efficient. 6 million blacks have been arrested under the pass laws over the last 10 years. That's over half the total black adult population. In the towns, theatres, cinemas, hotels and restaurants are for whites only. There are no facilities for blacks. At lunchtime, the takeaway counter and the pavement are the blacks' only choice. This home is in a suburb of Johannesburg. 3 servants work and live here. They earn £2.40 a week. They're on call 24 hours of the day, 6 days a week. Their families are forbidden to stay with them here, for this is a white area. The servants' rooms are in the backyard and by law have to be separated from the house. Mrs. Gertrude Mbata has been a servant since the age of 15. Her husband lives 30 miles away in Soweto. She sees him once a week on her day off. She works so that they can pay for their 4 children to go to school. Since her children are forbidden to stay with her here, she's sent them 300 miles away to a relative in the Bantustans. She's lucky if she can see them once a year. Mrs. Ayante Nkosi looks after Melissa. She's one daughter of her own. Her only son died from malnutrition.
What put can do outside there? What put can do? Eat like a big girl. Nah, eat.
When she accepted this job, she had to send her own daughter away to friends in the Bantustans. Her husband lives in an all-male barrack in Soweto. She's forbidden to stay with him there. He's forbidden to stay with her here. When these pictures were taken, she was about to have a baby.
There you are.
A few weeks later, she gave birth to twins in the local black hospital. They will have no choice but to send them away to friends as soon as they're weaned, so that she can continue to look after Melissa and earn the money to keep them alive. The only common friendship between white and black is that between a black nanny and her white child. Even then, it's short-lived. As this child grows up, she'll learn that it's not the custom for black and white to walk arm in arm. Meanwhile, in the black areas, their own children make do with what they can on their own. Many of these children only see their mothers once a year. Schooling is compulsory and free for white children. In 1970, the government spent £160 on each white child's education and £9 on each black child.
and the izinto ezilishumi nesikhombisa.
45% of black children don't go to school despite South Africa's wealth. The main reason is that by law, blacks, unlike whites, have to pay for their children's education. Even those that do get to school have to follow a special syllabus which is inferior to that taught in white schools. For, as Dr. Verwoerd said, the purpose of Bantu education is
to ensure that the natives will be taught from childhood that equality with Europeans is not for them.
Foreign companies have always been attracted by the huge profits that are a feature of the South African system. Nearly all the major British, American, French, German, Italian and Japanese firms that are household names in their own countries have subsidiaries here. They've been crucial to South Africa's industrial development and today control 80% of all private industrial production. They claim that their continued presence will lead to the gradual erosion of apartheid and the economic betterment of the blacks. But the government specifically deny this. As Mr. Viljoen, the Minister of Labour, has said,
there are social considerations affecting the maintenance of our white identity which are far more important to us than any economic considerations.
Furthermore, the facts suggest that up till now, foreign companies have allowed themselves to become part of racist white South Africa. For example, nearly all of them pay wages below the poverty datum line. Here in Port Elizabeth, the centre of the foreign-owned motor and rubber industries, the infant mortality rate is 15 times as high for blacks as for whites. And one black child in every 3 is dead by the age of 1. In foreign-owned factories, there's the usual rigid colour bar. Management, supervisory and so-called skilled work is reserved for whites. There's not one registered black apprentice in the whole country. The profits of one of the major foreign car companies, British Leyland, were in 1970 and 71 £200 per worker in Britain and the rest of the world. In South Africa, they were £1,000 per worker, 5 times as much. Of every 1,000 cars produced by this Volkswagen factory, 3 will be sold to blacks. After work, blacks must return to the townships. For in the cities, there's a curfew from dusk till dawn, applicable to them only. During this period, they're expendable. They've catered to the needs of the whites and must now lose themselves in the townships. Bantu beer halls are the only amenities available to blacks in the townships. They are run by the government and are only licensed to sell Bantu beer. Women are forbidden entry. So what hope is there of change? The policies of the government suggest that they're determined that there should be no peaceful change, and instead that they're preparing for a confrontation. For example, it's government policy that every white man, woman and child should be able to shoot. Every police station has a pistol club where marksmen teach men and women how to shoot. Under the government's new youth preparedness proposals, drilling and shooting are compulsory school subjects for both boys and girls. In addition, there's conscription for all white males. The government's present target is to be able to put 250,000 men into the field at short notice. South Africa's annual military expenditure is £190 million. Her expenditure on black education is £8 million. She depends on her Western allies for her massive arsenal of weapons. These Impala are Italian planes, produced here under special license. They're equipped with British Rolls-Royce engines, also manufactured here under special license. This is the British Buccaneer, produced by Hawker Siddeley. These French Mirage are jet strike aircraft carrying 36 air-to-ground missiles. Today it's the French who, in defiance of United Nations resolutions, continue to supply South Africa with most of her sophisticated weaponry. Alouette helicopters, Daphne submarines, and a missile system. Against all the odds, there's growing labour unrest among the black population. The increasing number of strikes are a sign of the blacks' refusal to accept their exploitation any longer. Nearly all the major foreign firms were hit by these protests during 1973. This is the end of a workers' meeting at Metalbox, a leading British firm. On their return, the workers discovered that the management had called in the police and locked them out. This is the normal practice in industrial relations in South Africa. The management then issued an ultimatum to the workers. Either they accept their wage offer or they lose their jobs. Unemployment is 22% among the blacks, and there are no union funds. So most workers had little choice but to accept the offer, although the increase still left many wage packets below the poverty datum line. Assured of the support of Western companies, the government continues to carry out its twin apartheid policies of resettlement and migrant labour. They're accelerating the removal from the townships of all blacks who don't qualify as serving the needs of the white man. To do this, they're undertaking a massive program of building single-sex hostels in all the townships. These giant barracks house the men whose wives and children are being sent to the Bantustans. The government's ultimate aim is that all the blacks should officially live in the Bantustans, but that the men and women needed by the farms, factories and kitchens of white South Africa should spend 11 months in every year in these single-sex labor camps. Their commitment to the destruction of black family life is unambiguous. Mr. Froneman has said,
"We are trying to introduce the migrant labor pattern as far as possible in every sphere. This is, in fact, the entire basis of our policy as far as the white economy is concerned."
And in the Bantustans, they're building more and more resettlement camps like Ozizweni and Dimbaza. The first huts were built in 1968, but the majority of the 7,000 people who live here now have been moved from towns in the last 3 years. Once you can no longer work for the whites, this is how they dispose of you. There have been many deaths in Dimbaza in the last 3 years. By 1973, there were 60 adult graves and 450 children's graves. This is a special children's graveyard. Nearly all the children died before the age of 2. These graves have been dug in preparation for the next month's toll. During the hour you've been watching this film, in South Africa, 6 black families have been thrown out of their homes. 60 blacks have been arrested under the pass laws. And 60 black children have died of the effects of malnutrition. And during the same hour, the gold mining companies have made a profit of £35,000.